Greetings, all my lovely students. This is Mr. O'Connor once again with part 2 of our American Slavery Cornell Notes. So last time we were doing notes, we were looking at the Atlantic slave trade and the origins of slavery in general. And now we're going to be looking at the specific Atlantic crossing for African people. Very brutal, a term I'm going to continue to use. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So Middle Passage is a concept that we're going to look at today, as I promised we would. And of course you'll have to know what triangular trade is. So let's jump right in. Cornell Notes number 2 for American slavery. Middle Passage. Brutal, brutal, brutal. Let's do it. Central question we got from yesterday, today's date. Make sure you're putting it under your last notes, okay? Put the date there. Most of you guys know this. Some of you are still not getting it, so I'm going to remind you right now. The essential question, how did slavery affect the development of the United States of America? Not a simple question to answer. The objective, students will be able to examine the brutality of the Middle Passage in order to analyze the triangular trade. Speaking of triangular trade, ooh, nice fade and dissolve. Yeah. Triangular trade. It's a system of trading where a country pays for its imports, what it's bringing in to the country from one country, with its exports to another. So it's bringing in goods from, let's say, this country over here, and it's paying for those goods by what it sells to this country over here. That makes sense. So as it worked for the Atlantic slave trade or the triangular trade, Britain and Europe gave weapons and textiles and technology because they had the manufacturing down, right? They were industrialized and they could make all this stuff, this very specific and technical things with their machines, right? And also with a lot of help and labor. West Africa gave slaves. So Europe would show up with the weapons and textiles, trade it for slaves, and in the Caribbean, people would trade the slaves for sugar, rum, coffee, rice, tobacco, and then bring it back to Britain and Europe. Who want those things. So that's how it worked triangularly, and I'll show you an image here. So you see let's start in Europe. They would bring down those textiles and those manufactured goods to West Africa, empty their ships, grab slaves, then head to the Caribbean, drop off the slaves, pick up rum and tobacco and all of rice and all that other fun stuff, and cotton eventually, and then bring it back to Europe. Okay, and you can see another one here. It's kind of all laid out for you there. So pause here and look at it if you really need to. So the Middle Passage specifically, and this is a key word and a concept obviously, ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean full of African slaves. So that part of the Atlantic slave trade, that part of the triangular trade that brought Africans, the slaves, from West Africa here, this is called the Middle Passage, and you can see it labeled down here, okay? So that is the Middle Passage. Again, part of the triangular trade still, but just specifically known as the Middle Passage. Brutal, and we're going to look into that. Let's talk about Caribbean slavery first. 90% of African slaves went to the Caribbean. So this is out of the out of the Americas, and we looked at Brazil last time, but out of the North America, 90% of all African slaves went straight to the Caribbean. And in the Caribbean, there were the large plantations that most of us, when we think about slavery, that's what we think about, these large plantations of sugarcane, or maybe tobacco even, but these large, huge farms, basically huge farms, where there's hundreds of slaves working at one time. A lot of slaves were trained there, training grounds for slaves, and then they were sent to the United States. Instead of directly going from Africa, there was a little bit of a training area, more or less, like a lot of slaves would see how they would get the idea of what slavery is, and then be shipped to the United States. All right, that's the end of our notes for me, anyway. You guys need to watch the rest of a video, and this one, again, is brutal. You will do a summary at the end, as always. I just want to show you what that video looks like. This is the Tráfico Negreiro Amistad, and I think that is Portuguese. I might be totally wrong. Maybe not. So this is, again, a video that showed from a movie, Amistad, and a lot of you guys have probably seen it. but I want you to watch through it. There's 3 main questions to answer. Make sure you convert them to notes, like it says in 3D Game Lab. Okay? Tag the answers. All right, people. Keep working. I know it's going to be a brutal video. Watch what you can, and I'll see you in class. Peace. Numero dos is done.